Hello folks, I hope that you are having just a great day today. Today we're going to be taking a look at the final piece of fiction that J.R.R. Tolkien published in his life in the late 60s. It's called The Smith of Wooten Major, which takes place in the town of Wooten Major, which is bigger than Wooten Minor, which is why it's called Wooten Major. And we're going to be following along with the character who is our point of view character, the Smith of Wooten Major, although we'll not be introduced to him until later on in the story when he's a boy. But the idea of this story, and in this story, which is again Tolkien's last, it was written when he was an old man, and he considers it sort of an old man's tale. He wrote this story, and he came up with the core idea of the story when he was writing an introduction to a story by George MacDonald called The Golden Key. By the way, that introduction is actually in this copy of The Smith of Wooten Major, which I'll link to you below in case you want to read it. And the idea that he came up with while writing this was the story that he turns into these 60 pages each or so in my novel with pictures. So it took me like maybe an hour for me to read it because it's a smaller hardcover. It's really more of a soft cover size thing. But anyway, so while he was writing his introduction, he came up with this core idea of fairy, of the fairyland, and this idea of the connection between fairy and real life. And these sorts of things, and Tolkien has written on fairies, on fairy stories, an essay where he talks about his sort of take on the nature of fairy stories, and he looks at them and he considers them not just for children, not just things that should be dismissed very ably. And you can see this idea in this short story. For example, one of the things that's going to happen is that in the town of Wooten Major, one of the key things that happens is this master chef. This master chef makes these great things and great works for the village to celebrate. And one of the things that the master chef does, which is his signature thing, is this good children celebration, an event that happens every 24 years. And they invite 24 children that are all supposed to be good, although sometimes bad ones are invited when they shouldn't have been, and sometimes good ones aren't invited when they should have been because mistakes are made. That's already told at like the second page. And then the master chef creates this great, amazing work of this great cake. And then the great cake is eaten by these 24 kids. And the idea is that the great cheffery, and we're told early on in this story that the house that the great chef uses, the master chef uses rather, used to be gilded, used to be detailed out, but it's no longer. It's dilapidated. And and we have a chef who is older and about to retire. He's never actually embraced an apprentice, which is unusual for that time. But he goes on a holiday for a short period of time and comes back with an apprentice that most people just call Prentice. His friends call him Alf, and Alf is a very talented but they call him a bit young for an apprentice. But hey, it's the master cook's choice. Nobody's going to get on that person on who they chose for their apprentice. And then one day the master chef leaves and retires and leaves the village and leaves it in the hands of the apprentice that he brought in. But the village doesn't like him. He's an outsider. He's only been doing it for a couple of years. They don't trust him. So they appoint somebody named Noakes to run the things, and he is not because he was one of the people that grew up in that genre. He's now a full-age man. He's older, and they think that it's 9 years until the 24 good children feast. So they're going to hold up. They think that'll be enough time for him to learn on the job, and he learns a lot from the apprentice, from Alf, but he doesn't acknowledge it. And one of the things that he talks about fairies and the introduction of fairies and that sort of thing. And you find out that and this is a common sentiment among Wooten Major, fairies are for kids, they're not for grown-ups. And so you can see the idea of J.R.R. Tolkien's on fairy tales coming through in this story. This idea that they're not just for children, that they're not just cute little things. They're mean and they're nasty, and they will take your head off. So this idea that fairies are just cute little things for children and should just be the playground of children, you can actually see in this story. So what we end up doing is that he has his great celebration 9 years later. His apprentice Alf makes most of the cake, and they decide to put things in the bake batter. And there is a fairy queen on the top of it, on the decoration. And again, they decided to put like coins and that sort of thing in the star. And there is a fairy star that they find in the previous chef's possessions, so Noakes tells Alf to put it in the cake. So Alf puts it in the cake in order for somebody to find. He says that's a fairy star. That's not what it's for. But he follows the instructions from Noakes anyway. And Noakes puts it in the fairy star. The children arrive for this feast. It's a great cake because Noakes wasn't the person who made it. And then or decorated it or anything like that, right? And so the cake is well accepted by the village, and people start opening up their pieces of cake and they start searching their cake for the items that they're told ahead of time are in there and have been baked into the cake. And nobody can find the fairy star. We don't know what happened to the fairy star. We'll find out a little bit later that there was a boy who's about 10. He was the son of the smith. They call him Smithson. And Smithson wound up eating the fairy star. And he's younger, he's about 6, and then when he turns 10, a couple of years later after he ate the fairy star will appear on his forehead, and it will become his passport to the fairy kingdom. And he will be protected by Starbright, and he'll be called by the fairy creatures Starbrow. And that'll be his nickname for the book. So Starbrow's our main character, then for the rest of the story. Now the story will go on through most of the life of our Smith, Starbrow, the Smith of Wooten Major, who the story is named after. We'll learn more about his smithing. We'll follow along with his family, his kids. Decades will pass in this story, so it has that sort of an epic feel. You can also kind of see this story, and there's kind of like my synopsis of the first 10 pages or so, the 60-page short story. But you can definitely see the synopsis and the beginning of the things that from J.R.R.'s Tolkien, his essay that he wrote on fairy tales in this story. You can also kind of see it as a bit of an allegorical. Hey, I'm an old man. This is an old man's tale, is what he called it, with his writing and the people that he spoke to, and his public readings. He came to this. This is one of the few things that he wrote fiction in his old man. Many of the things that he published after The Lord of the Rings were written before, like Farmer Giles of Ham. He wrote in his 20s. He wrote in the 20s or the 30s or the 40s. So the vast majority of things, he's not regularly writing prose at this point in time after Lord of the Rings is finished, with the exception of the Silmarillion, which is really more of a history book than it is prose. Although I haven't read it, so I can't speak to that much, but that's what I've been told by people. It's not a traditional prose story. But anyway, so you can definitely see, I think a little bit of an allegorical idea in here, the appearance of fairy, the obsession with fairy, with this person growing up, kind of like Tolkien's obsession with his legendarium growing up. And then there is a time later on where, spoiler, okay, I'm going to end the spoiler in like 5 seconds. Spoiler. Okay, and the spoiler should last about a minute. There is a time where he has to give up the Elven Star in order to, when he's older. And he doesn't like to do that. And again, that kind of feels like Tolkien giving up his legendarium as well. So that also is, I think, a key part of the story that also is very allegorical in nature too. I think you can see it as this, he's writing about stuff. I don't think he does it consciously. Tolkien never wrote about things allegorically consciously. He said that on a few times, but I definitely think you can see it subconsciously in there. I think there are signs of Tolkien writing about himself. Anyway, there's the end of my allegory. I'm sorry, the end of my allegory. It's the end of his allegory. The allegorical conversation. That's the end of my spoilers. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on. So that is my take on Smith of Wooten Major, written in 1967. It's been published in several different forms and in collections, and I've never read it until now. So I'm going to be going ahead and giving it it's a little disjointed in times, so I'm only going to be giving it a 7 out of 10, even though I love J.R.R. Tolkien and I would give a 10 to all of his works in the Legendarium. But this I'm only giving a 7 out of 10. But it's a 7 out of 10 for J.R.R. Tolkien, and you definitely want to read it, right? I mean, this is a guy who was arguably the single most influential writer in fantasy of all time. And fantasy follows his footprints ever since. So this guy dominated his genre. So a 7 from J.R.R. Tolkien is still pretty good. But I do think that there are some things. This is not his farmer. This is not as fun as Farmer Dwellers of Ham. It's not as whimsical as The Hobbit, although there are definitely some fun scenes. It's not as dangerous as The Lord of the Rings. It's not as but there is something here to it. The story continues to be published even through today, and there's a lot here to recommend it. So, and I do recommend it. If you haven't read it like me until last night, I would recommend that you do so. And it's going to be like an hour of your time. So why not take that time, knock out these 60 pages with like maybe 10 pages of pictures in smaller print, in a smaller book. It doesn't take that much of your time or commitment. Again, I'll link you to it in the comments below. Have you read The Smith of Wooten Major by J.R.R. Tolkien? If so, let me know what your take is in the comments below. Did you agree or disagree with anything in this video? I would be more than happy to engage with it further in the comments below. If you like this video, why not hit that subscribe button? Because there's going to be a lot more reasons to follow in fantasy like this one, science fiction, and horror. And then finally, hey, I just want to thank you for taking some time out of your day and investing it and watching my video. We all have so many things that are happening in our lives, right? And we're pulled in so many different directions. So the fact that you spent this time with me is incredibly humbling, and I appreciate it. So thanks again, and have a great day.